But hey, man, maybe that new Secretary of Transportation will cut loose some funds for what you're working on.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That there may be money though in Health and Human Services, but it is feasible that we could get money from transportation for
They've got funds.
stuff.
It's part of the transportation plan. And he does like to ride bikes. Trying to remember, I thought that one of his initiatives was to put bike lanes into that city that you were in.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't pay that much attention.
Oh man, he's got to be a bicycle guy. He's from South Bend. So I gave you a link to the research I was doing. NASCAR has a bunch of home tracks.
Yeah, I copied that into the document here.
And some of them, like the reason I took a look is because I have one right here next to my house, and I could easily get 5 to 10 Ks of paved road that is off the main drag, and it's got hillside as part of it.
Yeah, and you're located in
Monroe, Washington.
Up in Washington. Yeah, you should talk to Joe Holmes.
Yeah, he and I are going to speak.
Okay, good.
I reached out to him already.
Good. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for coming on. We do have a small group, and so I think what we'll do is we'll kind of hone in on some of the areas that kind of got left a little bit more open-ended, and I'll kind of bring you up to speed on where we're at. I do want to do a quick check-in, and that allows the transcription program to know who you are, and so it'll auto-transcribe everything. So along those lines, if there's something that you do not want to say on air, don't say it. It's better that we take those conversations off air, and you can tell me your opinion, and I can keep that confidential, because I do relay these things back to USA Cycling. They are on a lot of these conversations, and I've talked to Rob a couple times already about what we're doing. And so for the question, tell me about your, just kind of say what your first event was in cycling, your first organized event in cycling, and say your name. So I'm Sean Wilson, and my first event was actually the Foxy Fall Century in Davis. Daniel, you want to go?
Yeah, mine was Kermesse in Ramstein, Germany.
Great. Mr. Creed.
Well, it wasn't quite the Foxy Falls Century. Foxy Falls was my second event. My first event was the Bear Mountain Classic in 1992.
Great. I didn't give my year. It would date me. And Clay.
My first event was, I believe, a collegiate crit in about 2003.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to show a slide deck here. And let's see. So this is going to just bring you up to speed on the things that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks. And then we'll jump into the current set of discussions. Where's my cursor? Oh, okay. So the first thing is I got to give you access to the document. That would be helpful. So in the chat window, you are going to get a Google Doc link, and that will take you to the master document that we'll be working from. And I can share my screen when we get done with the slide deck too, so we can just be looking at that. So the first thing that happened was Kristen Diefenbach took us through long-term athlete development and talked about how there's a variety of different models of looking at athlete development. And we're using the American development model as our framework for, having our conversations. And based on some of the work that came out really early, I hope can everybody see the slides okay?
Yep.
Great. So the first thing that really came out from our conversations is that if you look over a person's age versus, basically their capacity or, just their ability to ride bikes, is that when you look across their developmental ages, there's a trajectory they're following, and you need to make sure that it's a continual process. And along with that continuity in the process, you have to have a curriculum that goes with it. And so those two things go hand in hand. And if you ever break that curriculum, it now sets the stage for the people to basically drop out of the sport and go somewhere else. And so that's something to really keep in mind, especially when you look at our sport. And I'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute, that we do not follow that kind of trajectory. It's not like soccer or the other organized sports. So that brings me to the two basic overarching goals that we have as a sport. The first one is that we need to demonstrate that we're organized, because we look like a chaotic mess. If you have like a little kid that's just starting to ride, there's no opportunities for that kid to really learn about our sport and move forward, unlike something like soccer or swimming or most of the other organized sports out there.
Look, we need to go that way.
The second part that goes along with this is we need to legitimize the sport. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. And we spent a lot of time talking about that earlier today. And I think we're going to I'll just touch on it, but we'll kind of skip over that piece and kind of jump into more meat and potatoes of things that I think that we can really be able to take care of. Related to that, I've already said it, is that we need curriculum-driven approaches. And a lot of this came from Boulder Junior and from Durango Devo, kind of pushing that into the conversation. And they've had a lot of success using those types of approaches. And as I said, you need continuity in that process. Interleaved with all this is that, through sport, one of the overarching things that most of the junior clubs do is that we're teaching life lessons through sport. And there's a huge social engagement component of it. And so you're out there with your friends, and then there's sport identity component to that also. The other things that the really successful junior clubs are doing is they're developing leadership skills amongst the riders. And then you have this community engagement piece. So it's not just about themselves, but about the wider community. And a lot of times it revolves around the town they live in, or, doing trail maintenance and things like that are brought in through like NICA. That's a real prominent component of their organization. We've had a lot of discussion about bike fit and things like that, and a lot of that conversation came from Happy Friedman. And then everything that we're doing now is really layered on top of risk management. Ultimately, our goal is as coaches, develop athletes for a lifetime and develop cyclists for their lifetime, regardless of what part of activity that they get into. Clearly, now we're talking about performance tracking. And so, there's some other things that get layered on top of that. But we would hope that those individuals continue to ride for the rest of their lives. We started off by talking about little kids on balance bikes and, getting on their first pedal bike. And I'm just calling that kind of discovery and develop. Those are ADM 1 and 2, pretty young kids. And it's, when we look at it, these are all local programs. So just in your town, they're introductory programs for all the kids. They're up through elementary school. And the key part here is just fun and safe environments. We had a lot of discussion about doing this in schools and having community-based programs and things like that. And then when you jump into ADM 3, now they're getting a little bit older. They're getting up to middle school level and even into high school. And we also talked about U23 collegiate athletes being involved at this stage of the game. And again, these are all local programs. So the kids are just in their local environments, riding bikes for fun and learning through these continuous processes and curriculum that the clubs are putting together. And these are really kind of aimed at programs for kids who want to ride a bike. And again, they can be based around a school, or they can even be community-based programs, and there's strengths and weaknesses to each one. but the kids are really expanding their boundaries and getting, they're getting out and doing a lot of new things. There was a lot of discussion about how you can include families in that process. So, you can actually have families fully engaged in the sport. And then Kristen actually brought out that one of the things that's really unique about cycling is that we have the ability to be sport agnostic, where we can actually allow for or provide opportunities for kids, even all the way through college, to come into the sport simply for cross-training purposes for their own activities. So that's a really unique thing, and I think we're seeing that in a larger way fairly recently with a lot of crossover athletes. So now when we get to ADM4, there's really two different components to it. The first part is what I would consider our traditional activities, where you come in and you start bike racing, and that's where you're participating in the process, and then you're aiming to succeed. And then there's the second component where you're excelling for high performance, and then going into something like, an aim would be towards getting onto like Mike Creed's program at the end of this, or developmental elite teams, or whatever they happen to be, but at a very high level. When we just tried to identify the kids that were going to be coming in and competing, is you want them to be, teenagers, older teenagers, and you want them to be able to just really be persistent about the sport, is you want these kids to be, really engaged with the sport. And I think that's a major problem that we have just in terms of our society, in terms of our cycling culture, is that we're putting kids in at a very high level to start with. And you can use Nike as a classic example of that, where the kids come in and it's supposed to be just participatory, but they throw them into competitions at a very early ADM stage. Like, I would expect that they're more ADM3 than ADM4. And so, I would think that the expectations would be a little bit lower. So we have three primary groups we're interested in. We're going to talk about participation first. So, this is getting them engaged to what we'd consider classical bike racing and doing other things. And that's why I asked, like, what kind of ride did you do first, or event? And so they might be coming in and just doing events before they actually switch over and start doing real competitions. And then we'll talk about that performance track. And we would hope that they all eventually become active for life, which is, our end goal. A really cool thing about our sport, just to kind of bring it around, is that we have a lot of different opportunities for people to ride bikes. And, ranging from mountain biking, road, they can even go into the industry, become mechanics and things of that nature, or they can even just commute or do bike packing, or whatever it happens to be. Just tons and tons of opportunities. A big issue that we have, though, is that everybody kind of silos off into their own little compartment, and they don't really interact so well. But as coaches, we actually have the ability to really interface between those different silos and help kids navigate that. And that brings us around to, kind of the essence of long-term development, where, we're looking at an athlete-centered universe where we're trying to help the athlete find their way through sport, but we're driving the equation as coaches. We're just trying to help them navigate the process. And so what we're really trying to do through these different conversations is take our passion coupled with our knowledge base and start thinking about what processes we can put into place that would be sustainable for the future. And so we don't want to necessarily think about what's happening today per se. We want to use our mind's eye and our knowledge and experience to say, what should it look like in the future, so that we can best serve our athletes and and be able to promote our sport to the wider community. All right, so I'm going to flip over to the, let me get the document over there. And so hopefully everybody has access to the document. I'm going to just drop it in there again. We've had a couple more other people join. Let me just put it back in there. So you should be able to get into the document and make edits directly. And David, Tom, I did incorporate your comments from earlier today. So I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole about how we improve the legitimacy of the sport. And we discussed this for, I don't know, almost half an hour or something. But the showing, based on the discussions that we had earlier today, it really seemed like when you think about the ecosystem of the sport and you use NICA as a model that's doing things properly, even though they're not fully legitimized, because they're very well organized and they operate, in their own silo in an organized way, is that they're having great traction, and they have a lot of success, and probably just through replicating those types of efforts in other disciplines, we could have equal successes. And that's just my prediction, but I'm just going to put it out there. If there's any other comments about kind of from a very high level being organized and what impact that'll have, just go ahead and bring that up now. But otherwise, we're going to skip over, this kind of legitimacy component, because it's a pretty big topic. Okay, well, hearing nothing, we'll move on. So go ahead and just type your comments in if you have any. We kind of talked about this before, is that really now we're looking at ADM 4, which is just participation, but it's competitive participation now, high school, collegiate, and crossover athletes. But so in terms of the outcomes for these athletes, we really want them, at least a portion of them, to be moving forward towards DET programs when they graduate from being a junior into the senior ranks. But there was still a lot of discussion about socializing them, building life skills, being able to handle traveling, and being able to interact with coaches and things of that nature. A lot of these other social components that a lot of times get lost if you're just kind of on a performance track. Joe Lewis from Boulder Junior brought up this idea of understanding where they are along the developmental pathways and how they're actually going to be able to move forward in the sport. All right. Any other comments about, kind of what we're looking for for these athletes in terms of goals? Again, you can just type in there if it'll take a little while for you to digest this, and then you can just kind of come in and type something in. This next piece is something that, we couldn't really nail down. I think it's important that we try to hone in on this a little bit more, is that, and I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. And so here, when we talk about where these activities are being run, and we had some discussion about this afternoon, as Joe Lewis originally brought up, that half of their time is going to be spent locally, and then a bulk of the racing would be at the regional level, and then a little bit national, and even a little bit less at the international level. But a bulk of this, really where they're going to really be competitive would probably be at the regional level and the local level, but just kind of learning as they go to the bigger events. So when we drop back to who's actually running the activities, we talked about cycling clubs to a certain extent, but I want to have a better impression for, I have Johnny coming into the sport. I want to direct him to an appropriate team to race for. If he's just getting started, would that be at his, a team that's located in his town, or would that be something with a much more regional basis? Does anybody have any strong feelings?
Hey, Sean, this is David. I just think it depends on accessibility for the kid and how ready the kid really is. So I don't think we can say at this point what's right or wrong. I think only we have the sort of the framework where I look at it and say, okay, internationally, that's where USA Cycling comes in. But for the local stuff, it's kind of tough, because it's going to be all over the board.
Well, I'm saying, with a mind's eye that, we've been able to change the framework over the years, and we do have a club located in every town. Would you want the kid to be riding for that club, or would you think it's okay for him to be riding for something much further away?
I would ideally say it's assuming that the club local club is a good club with respect to how they bring juniors up and stuff. You want to be with them because it's just hands-on, right? I mean, you can do a lot of coaching remotely with power meters and stuff, but you can't ride with somebody, right? I mean, if the coach is in Colorado and the kid's in Laguna Beach, they're not riding together. So I would think that ideally, again, but you're assuming that the local program is a good program.
Well, I mean, this is all, best case scenario stuff, right? I mean, this is like if we were going to make a recommendation just in a general way, it would be, okay, we want to recommend a local club in this case, and they're going to have a certain sphere of influence.
Yeah, I got to agree with what David said, is that as a general rule of thumb, I think keeping kids in a local club where they're going to make friends and they'll have people to ride with regularly, as a rule of thumb, I think that's probably the way to go. But it's not the end all be all, but it's probably a good place to start.
Great. And then in terms of regional elite Devo teams, national Devo teams, I mean, I think of the national elite Devo team as being something like Lux as a prototypical one. That seems like it would be better set for somebody that's really performance tracking and, their eye is on, international racing for the most part, even though that's not it's not a huge chunk of the racing, but that's really the eye that they have. And then they'd be moving forward into, these, much more nationally oriented development programs.
Yeah, we probably need teams like Lux, in every region. Like Northern California could probably have 3 of them. But that's also, those are the kids that are putting in a lot more time into the sport, more mileage, watching what they eat.
Right.
They're all getting coaching. So that's essentially what you're saying. That's a regional elite Devo team. That's like what Freddie was talking about up here, trying to have an academy, essentially a feeder program for Team California. Kind of what you're doing in Redlands, Sean. I mean, just having one up here.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving through that process now, and I don't want to go down into those weeds. I mean, that's not the purpose of this conversation. But there is a fundamental distinction, I think, between a cycling club and a racing team. The organizational structures are completely distinct from one another. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you have a team like Lux everywhere.
Right. And so from the high school based programs like NICA teams seem to fit pretty well at this level. When I think about ADM 3 versus ADM 4, when I look at the things that we've talked about, it seems like a NICA team actually fits within this scope pretty well.
I would say a portion of the NICA team does, because the whole thing about NICA is you can be on the team, but you don't even have to race, or you can. And the whole idea is you're not worried about finishing DFL. Whereas at this level, you're looking at kids they're not necessarily unhappy with finishing last, but they don't want to finish last. They care because they're more focused sort of on that growth aspect of and the racing side of it. So that's a sort of the distinction I have with NICA with respect to like Lux. Anybody can be on the NICA team. And which is great, but that's not the focus. In other words, moving up and being better as a team isn't the focus of the team, because the riders aren't that way, which is, again, what NICA is supposed to be. So I think when you're coming to the road and track side and you want kids, and you're talking about kids who want to excel in the sport, it's a little different infrastructure, like you're saying, and a different focus. So that's where I would just say NICA is slightly different.
Okay, so but a portion of the NICA team kind of seems to fit in this space, but other ones you're saying are probably more ADM 3.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and here's the thing: it's a very small portion of these NICA teams that actually fit in the ADM 4. It's really surprising. As many racers as they have, very few of them are actually really serious about winning and continuing on in the sport.
it's just, I don't really want to go too far down in the weeds about this stuff, but what I've seen amongst the NICA teams is that they're running everybody as if they're ADM 4, all the practices,
Mhm.
all that jazz. And so it's going to have a high attrition rate at the end of the day. Even if they stick with it for a couple of years, it seems like they're dropping out of sport. I don't have the demographics on that yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to get that type of information of basically where they go after the end of their NICA programming days. All right. The next part of this is college-based teams, and the club programs, they're, again, I would say they're probably more analogous to the NICA teams because there's a high diversity in the ridership, and in a lot of cases just college students that want a social group, and in other cases you have high-powered driven riders that are really moving forward in the sport, and you can have everything else in between. But we do have opportunities. I think we have varsity based programs that kind of run themselves in a more professional way, and then the long-term discussion I think is going to need to include talking about NCAA, but we won't get into that today. There was some discussion about private camps being run by coaches, and then actually having local associations running camps and things like that also, which they've done in the past in Colorado to great success. A couple things that we didn't really touch on that I think are worthwhile are the idea of how NICA controls their ecosystem, and they have regional race program that's controlled by NICA, so it actually provides a really nice organizational structure, and I'm thinking that that can be part of our overall matrix moving forward if we generate a road-based scholastic programming. And I know that there's a couple of places around the country where this exists, where you can actually mimic what NICA does, but in the other disciplines, and use that as the focal point, and have it run in a very well organized way. Are there any comments about that? I know Clay, you've operated kind of in that space in the collegiate market, and David, you've been clearly involved with NICA over the years. Any thoughts about that? Basically kind of owning other ecosystems that drive programming.
We tried to do a track program one summer, but I think like what you're doing with the overnight programs, and maybe incorporate some road rides into those track programs. Like you base it out of a track, but like for us, it'd be Hellier, and there's tons of road rides around there, and there's tons of mountain biking and gravel rides. So you could run a program based out of Hellier that could incorporate 4 different types of cycling. So that's the way I would sort of, that keeps it interesting and fun. You throw a little bit of skill-based stuff in there on the track, and then you throw a little bit of dirt in there, a little bit of paceline work on the road, whatever it may be. It's hard to say. Because of the resources are so different everywhere. Who has a velodrome really, right? You guys do. Ours is outdoors, concrete, and it's all the way down in San Jose. So it's a haul to get there. I don't know, it's a hard one.
Any other comments about that? In the past, Mike Sayers has brought up the idea of having all-star travel teams too, which, in some ways, I look at it as a way of combining the scarce resources that these local clubs might have. Is we might not have enough money to send a full team for like a Kermesse block or something like that, but if we combine our resources, we'd be able to do so more easily, and be able to send one regional squad.
If they're truly that good, that's where I think USA Cycling's part of it, right? They're at that level where it's USA Cycling.
Well,
whether it's private funded, but it's under the auspices of USA Cycling.
Yeah, and that's kind of where their development program's going, right? The thing that Jim Miller's rolling out.
Yeah,
is they're privatizing it a little bit more than it was in the past. So but in Canada they do have provincial race teams, and I've already, I've been contacted by provincial teams to come down here to Redlands, right? So that's, same kind of thing. Would we send a California All-Star team to international events?
Yeah, in Colorado, when I was a junior, they had the regional teams, and the tradition was maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the national championships, we had a regional championships. And I know that it went back and forth between, maybe in the beginning it was USA Cycling, funded in some part or supported, but kind of towards the end it became more with the people in that region, and they would just take donations. And say the Rocky Mountain, Colorado region, we would go to 2 races a year and maybe a camp. So we'd go do like Vuelta Bisbee and then 89er stage race or something like this. And it would be a van with boy and girl cyclists, 15 to 18 years old, just doing different categories. And that was all donation based. I'm pretty sure USA Cycling didn't have a hand in helping with that.
Yeah, in hockey, in ice hockey growing up, we had AAA hockey. And so what that was, it was a regional all-star team, basically. You had to try out for it. But to try out, you already had to be on a AA team. And you would practice separately from your AA team, usually once a week. And it was a tournament travel team. And we always go to Colorado and Utah to play tournaments and stuff. So that's similar to what you're talking about, Sean. But that was actually, it was overseen by NorCal Ice Hockey, but each kid, it was pay to play. If you made the team, it was just extra cost on top of your AA team. So that's possible. I mean, again, we don't have, we've got NorCal Cycling up here, but they're not going to organize something like that. So we'd have to do it ourselves. But perhaps we do, Team California Juniors up here, and Team California Juniors in SoCal, and we take those teams and meet up at, racing, at high level races.
I'm just going to say they have merit.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, I'm really looking at the 10-year picture here. I'm not, a lot of this stuff is not anything we're going to be able to fix in the near term. I mean, there's certainly triggers we can pull in the near term to make things happen and have successes, and that's what Rob's trying to do through USA Cycling, right? They're trying to pull triggers quickly that are going to get them some success and gain some traction. There's issues on the long haul with the programs that they're trying to bring in. How do they integrate with the rest of the community and that kind of jazz. And that piece is a completely open-ended question for most of the stuff they're trying to do. But we're trying to say, okay, if we're going to change the sport, if we're going to change the narrative, what kind of elements do we want to see in that as coaches, right? And helping the athletes through, because we're not administrators. I mean, yeah, we administer stuff, but at our core, we're coaches. We're the people that are actually interfacing with the athletes, and that's where I'm coming from. I mean, a lot of other discussions are more at the managerial administration level. I don't care about that. That we can figure out. But the first question is, what do we actually provide for the kids? And what does that look like so it's appropriate? All right, so we already talked about where these kids are racing, that bulk of this stuff is local, regional level with some national, international travel. We've now kind of narrowed it down a little bit that there might be opportunities to combine people from different organizations together to help cut down on overall costs, so each club doesn't have to have so much to administer. We talked a bit about, I think we covered a lot of these activities already, and it came down that that there's a wide range of different opportunities for these kids at this level, ranging from club-based activities that are curriculum driven to larger group rides, where they can start developing their pecking order, and they're kind of become de facto race events for them. But you do have opportunities kind of in the Fondo gravel grinder market to get events that don't necessarily exist anymore. And I don't know that the traditional bike racing as we know it for road racing at least is going to come back due to the overall pressures put on that space. But there was a lot of discussion about clubs running events and how important that is. And, the counter to that is whether, clubs should be running the events kind of in an old school way, or whether we move towards something that's much more of an association driven race series, much like what NICA does. Well-defined series with a controlled process. Any other thoughts about that? About kind of what, like what events do you want to see for these kids to do? I mean, a lot of it's local, and then you have these other regional events. The national stuff, that's a whole different part of the equation. Again, you just feel free to just type stuff in. We had a lot of discussion about camps, and you've brought that up certainly. Mike, about the things that happened in Colorado, and David, you brought up the ones that we've run down here in Southern California using the velodrome as a sleepover, which were just more fun activities combined with some bike riding. So jumping into, we'll skip over this other part about how many days per week. Really, they're training and moving forward on their training, and it's going to be coach driven. And then we'll skip down here. One of the things, regarding costs, this is more, just to give an index to parents on what an overall yearly cost might be. I think this is a big problem in our sport, just in general, is a lot of people come into it and they don't know what those costs really are. And then and it's done so piecemeal for the most part that, they start seeing the costs really adding up quickly, but they don't know what the ceiling should be or what it should look like. Does anybody have any other impressions? I mean, the coaching costs here came from Boulder Junior in terms of what their general costs are. But when you start thinking about a kid that's mainly traveling regionally, what does that look like for an overall cost? And, if you have a number right off the top of your head, fine. If not, I'll just try to interleave that later. I can use some of my own cost estimates that I've put together over the years. And then where funding comes from, a lot of that, we talked about parents, scholarships, donations, sponsorship type stuff. But then, we also had some discussions about, pro teams, cycling, cycling down their old gear into local junior programs. And there's certainly been success with that in a number of areas. But, my basic question is, can this become a more formalized process, or is it best just done, on a one by one basis? And I would even say, based on some of the interactions I've had with teams, a lot of the teams seem to clear their stuff. And I don't know if this is true with you guys, with Avelo, whether you're doing like a clearing through pros closet, but if we can do a clearing through juniors first before it goes to pros closet, that could help reduce some of those fixed expenses for parents. I don't want to point my finger at you, but
no, that's fine. No, we don't do any of that sell-off thing. We really don't sell any of our equipment, just because I find that's how most teams get in trouble. That's why most teams, like, they need a new bike sponsor every second year, because every single thing they have, they sell and try to prop up their budget. So for us, we keep it pretty tight, and we repair everything. I mean, I just picked up, 6 bikes that had been broken, and we carbon repaired them. For the stuff that is out of date or whatever, we go through John Hamlin's junior team and give him a lot of the stuff. I definitely think that that's something that can be used, because I do think a lot of equipment gets wasted, just either through a long season of it being misplaced, or it's kind of dinged up, whatever. And I think, I'd be interested to see what kind of formal process you can make behind that. Either junior teams basically approaching pro teams and becoming somewhat like of a little kids league to that. So, like with Hamblin, he could have his team and it has like an Avolo jersey on it. And then we're showing Cannondale and Shimano that we're not, um, without their knowledge, becoming a dealer of theirs and selling their stuff for cheaper than they're selling it for. And, everything that they're giving us, is still being used. And I think sponsors really like that. But I guess to wrap that word salad up, I think it'd be really interesting for people to, in quotations, professionalize their approach to these teams and ask if there's some kind of relationship that could be made up.
Okay, great. I mean, we didn't get too far into that in the last couple of calls, and so that's just good to know that maybe you guys would be open to that, down the line. Certainly this year is a little unique, but I'm thinking more long term. Because it seems like I've certainly seen tons of the equipment I've bought, old gear, right? And it's like, well, it would have been a lot easier for me to just go directly to the source as opposed to just buying it off of eBay, which is what I've done. And it's like, okay, and I have, as I mean, I've got pretty much every manager in the country on my manager list for the Redlands Classic. It just seemed like that maybe we can package this a little better so that now we can get the resources out to the kids that are and a lot of stuff I'm getting I have somebody that does carbon fiber repair for us, so it's basically like I can take in all these broken bikes and just ship them down to him, and he'll fix them for cheap or free because he knows they're going out to the juniors.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of creativity that's needed. Is like, okay, you guys are just gonna kind of toss out this broken frame, but if you get a deal with somebody on broken frame, and then you have somebody who's willing to fix the frame for free, and just keep that thing going. Maybe it's
Yeah.
time, you start leveraging your position with Redlands, like host housing and stuff. You start promising better host housing and everything like that for better deals.
I'd like to say I could get you better host housing, but that's not my department.
Well, don't tell them that, but just allude that you can.
Oh, I see. Just sell it. Okay, so jumping into the projected progression, right? So we want some of these kids, we want a percentage of these kids to actually really move forward, right? And go into programs that are going to move into DET all the way out to World Tour programming. And Joe Lewis came up with just this rough estimate of like 10 to 20% of the kids are probably going to be able to move forward into that realm. And and a lot of this is going to be based on their capacity to race, but some other things that came out in terms of the qualities, the general qualities we want to see in those riders is they got to be persistent, they got to have a growth mindset. There was actually a lot of discussion about humility, so you don't want the real arrogant guys coming through necessarily, and the idea about passion. Again, the target audience is basically identical to the last one, but now they have a little bit more focus and drive to be into this level. And then in terms of primary outcomes, a primary outcome was we'd want them to graduate into DET or beyond, and possibly even to collegiate programs, depending on the track that the riders want to take. But there was also discussion about having riders kind of swap over and become your next level of support staff, directors, mechanics, and things like that, for the ones that seem to be gravitating to that type of stuff. And then when you think about those local programs, and I know that Durango Devo and Boulder Junior both do that, and we're doing it too now, because we have enough years under our belt, is having a multi-generational program. When I say multi-generational, I mean those kids that basically have graduated from your programs and now are actually coming back and acting as your mentors and leaders and things like that. And you would hope that they're now riding on some sort of higher level DET or pro team even, and so they're not around all the time, but they're around long enough that they can actually provide real mentorship and leadership to those younger riders. And a lot of that goes around to some of those skill sets that you have to build into them when they are younger. And we've had talk discussions about starting even at age 10 with little kids and start teaching them leadership skills and providing them opportunities for leadership and nurturing that process of engagement. So that's an interesting piece of the puzzle. So in terms of running the activities, who's actually driving these things? You know, I mean, the first thing is, you know, who are the directors? And they've got to be, you know, elite level coaches, people who really understand the business, they've been around. And then associated with that is providing actual mentorship and apprenticeship, what you'd consider classic apprenticeship opportunities for athletes, you know, to kind of step into these roles, or even people that are, you know, now retired to step into the roles and learn the business. And when you think about, you know, the teams, you know, now we're talking about those regional, national oriented development, you know, junior programs, but I think there's still a lot of room for, you know, composite team programs. And I use the Amy D foundation team as a, you know, a classic example of that, where you're able to run with a very small budget and be able to put things together very quickly based on availability of riderships. And you don't have to have as much, you know, overhead to the program. And that could go along with, you know, having those all-star type programs. They could almost be synonymous with one another. And then, you know, along with that, you know, you do have the ability to run race trips, much like the Kermesse trips that people run, or taking teams to various international events like Abitibi, Tour of Ireland, or whatever. And then those are driven by coaches and directors. Sometimes they're run by clubs and teams as well. And a lot of the programs that we've run through my squad, you know, you could actually say they were composite team programs, but we just put, you know, we basically put our jersey on the kids to take them to these places. Is there any other discussion about that? I mean, I know we discussed this, you know, back in the other section a little bit, but is there anything else that should really be added in here?
Looks good to me.
And again, you know, these are all working documents, so we can always come back to it at some other later date. So we had some discussion, you know, Billy kind of led it, you know, we had to try to figure out what percentage people were doing the activities. So, you know, local, we came out to about 15%, regional activities are about 50%. But now when you're thinking about the regional programming for these kids, it's really a training tool as opposed to, you know, a focus. And so the primary focus is, you know, national oriented races, and then some going to the international arena. And really this percentage was based on Billy talking about, yeah, if you take them for two race blocks, you know, in Europe, what does that look like from a time scale over the entire year? I don't know about, we didn't talk about managing individual race days. We didn't get into that level. And I don't think that's important for this part of the conversation. Certainly later on, if we start talking about a curriculum, then we're gonna have to get down into that kind of micromanagement. But this would be more time spent across the year doing activities. Is there any comments or suggestions on this? Okay. So moving on, what type of activities they do? I mean, you know, clearly, you know, the primary focus is going to be on the competitive events. But looking at our landscape here in the United States with the way things are changing, you know, that's where, you know, we had some discussion about the idea that we could move into more closed course environments. And, you know, we had some discussion about raceways and Dan dumped in here, you know, the NASCAR home tracks, and there are other tracks available too. Laguna Seca is a prime example, and the Thunder Hill Raceway up in Northern California. They're used pretty often. And I know that there's some things, you know, across the country that are done in the same kind of space. But it seems like a formalized approach to this might be helpful for us as a sport in providing appropriate competitive opportunities.
Hey, Sean, are you aware that NASCAR recommends to its drivers that cycling is one of their cross training sports?
Yeah, so I'm definitely aware of that, and that's something that I think is worth following up on and seeing if we can make some other inroads into that kind of arena.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah.
talk to Freddie. He coaches Bobby Labonte.
Okay.
He's him and Bobby are buddies, and he's actually his
That's
private
the
coach.
shit.
All right. So I mean, associated with this, there was also some discussion that was, I thought, fairly interesting about doing off-bike activities to ensure they know how to do their own whatever it happens to be. And I just put down doing their own mechanics and then figuring out their own logistics in a lot of cases, so they can actually get to events properly, because those are going to be skill sets that they're going to need when they move forward. In a lot of squads, you see a lot of hand holding of the junior riders, and I'm not so sure that they're coming out with appropriate skill sets. Mr. Creed, do you have any comments about that part of the equation?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I had noticed. We really never had a chance to explicitly work on it until this year. We had a camp in, I guess it was around June or July. Not the whole squad, just guys who had passed a COVID test and had safe ways to travel and stuff like this. So there's maybe 7 riders. And one of the things we did was setting up, we had the mechanics set up bikes in different ways and work as basically split them up in 2 different teams, and I don't know, a little competition on who knew how to bleed disc brakes and to adjust the DI2 shifting on the fly, because one of the greatest skills you can have as a professional cyclist is to be self-sufficient and not fussed and be able to help yourself, really. Obviously, professional teams there to help you, but there are some times where you just can't be a baby bird with your mouth open. So you need to be able to do it. So I think incorporating exercises like that, yeah, I think they're really good. Cool.
Thank you. I put down the idea of self-sufficiency. We didn't have that in there. I think that's a perfect way to summarize all that. And then in terms of, what they're doing from week to week and that kind of jazz, I just copied down what was in the previous block, but they're kind of following the ADM model. So, whatever it is, it's just appropriate for what they're trying to do. And you would hope that that whoever their coach is and their director, that they're guiding them properly. And I'm just going to jump down here. In terms of the overall cost per year, again, the costs are going up, and I just threw in a couple numbers that I had from my own budgets. That a tour of Ireland or a B2B trip or something like that, you're looking at $3,500 per rider, for the event. And Kermesse blocks, we just did that with Joe. We just priced this out, and they're anywhere from $4,500 to $6,500, depending on what kind of services you're able to provide. But again, it would be nice to be able to, provide something, and I talked with Greg McNeil, right before Aiden came on with you guys, and, chit chatting on the side of the road in the feed zone kind of thing. And, and he was like, yeah, we were spending 20,000 on Aiden per year. And, and then I thought about it. It's like, well, how much have I been spending on my kid kind of thing? And, I knew that, my son wasn't traveling as much, and so we were spending less, but, it's like, oh, I can see how it could easily tally up that high. And again, it's something that I don't think the parents really understand, and the money has to come from somewhere. I mean, if you look like a program like Lux or Hot Tubes or whatever, the costs are still there. They're real, and they have to come from somewhere, which goes into where does that money come from? In a lot of cases, you're talking about parents providing a lot of the money, but, otherwise you have angel investors. And that's when you go back to that sustainability piece, that doesn't look like a really good sustainable model. when I look at Boulder Junior or Durango Devo, those are income generating units. Basically, they're large businesses actually, that have a lot of people that are paying for service. But that money is going back out to the coaches. But they're not really traveling per se. But when you're talking about these kind of travel programs, you have a lot of money coming in, and it's going out to pay fixed costs for the most part, and paying for staffing and things like that. Are there any other comments about what can be done for funding in a other than having like bake sales or something like that, which don't seem very effective at this level?
No, I think the funding question is going to be the mystery of all of them. Like I think especially at a level where you're getting donors, maybe as some of the riders' family members as donors, where we on Volo we really can't do that, or we're not comfortable with it, because maybe when you start getting into race selection and roles within the team, maybe just by human nature, some of the parents think if they're giving you money, then they have a little bit more say. I mean, we do ask after the fact for riders who age out. We ask for a donation, but it doesn't really fix the problem at all.
So like an alumni donor pool.
Yeah, exactly. Before you were talking about the how in Canada they had regional teams and stuff, and keeping the alumni close. In Canada they have a thing. I think it's called Bridge the Gap. Is the fund they have, and it's a it's a group of riders, Canadian riders, who I believe have either made it to Division 2 or Pro Tour, something like this. And it's basically, if you're an upcoming rider under 23, I think it's limited to under 23s, but the Bridge the Gap will give you a donation somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. And you basically sign a contract, non-enforceable, but you're just pledging that if you make it to the Division 2 or Division 1, that you will now become an alumni donor. And I haven't checked in for a while on that, but I do know that it's still going. And so I guess by that logic and ignorance on my part, I assumed it's still going well. But it seemed like it was a good program that Swain Tuff and Andrew Pinfold set up. I think that the alumni, they probably put in a couple $100 a month a piece, and they I think once they get enough, it's become a pretty good program.
And so in that case, it's almost like a self-tax or like a tithing program that.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I think if one of them, stopped paying in or something, they're not going to come take his dog or anything. But it's definitely a way of paying back.
Cool. Those are good ideas. We didn't have that at all. So that's great. Yeah, and if you have any other thoughts about funding things, and they in a creative context, right? That's what we really have to think of, instead of just traditional going out and getting a sponsor that gets very little ROI for their money. That'd be good. We'll skip over the DEI considerations. I mean, that's a huge nut to try to crack, and it's going to take a lot of concerted effort. And I think it's a little beyond what we're trying to get at. We did have some good discussion on Sunday from Joe Holmes and Tad Hamilton about what the qualities are that you want to see when a rider moves up into the DET pro ranks. Beyond just getting the results, and having physical capacity and skill set to do the job, and then travels well. Joe's key comment: not a shit show. But also things like helping to pitch in, and that would go along with being versatile and being able to handle your own equipment and things of that nature. I'll put self-sufficient in here. Seems like a good place to put it. Being on time, having that growth mindset, and a bunch of other jazz. I mean, is there anything that really sticks out to you guys of guys who've come through, or even Jono, through the women that have come through the programs you've run in the past? Like kind of those key factors.
For me, it's not so much of what you're looking like traits to. I think it's more like how am I trying to say this? Basically, you're looking for bad things more than you're looking for good things. How about that? Like, because if you're at this point where they're in the development process, then it's more forgivable that they're more of a lump of clay, right? And lump of clay is okay, but like, you don't want somebody who's necessarily set in their own ways and needs things perfect. Like, you need it's a really silly way of putting it, and it's not the best way to put it, but more of an adventurous spirit, like somebody who's willing to go on an adventure here and try this bike racing thing. If I have somebody who is, for me, a big warning sign is if somebody has maybe not the greatest race results or something, but they have all these power files, and they're telling you about their watts to kilogram, and they're, these kind of things, like, where they're really all about more the numbers and that kind of thing. It's because that maybe their coach wants to be super involved and stuff like this. Is like, when you're that young, there's no way, that like you can take this forward into professional racing. Being a professional is about being good on your bad days. It's not about, oh, here's my best power file ever. It's not my best, like, here's my best day ever. Like, I want to see your worst days ever. I'm going to hire you off of your worst days, not off of your best days.
I'm trying to paraphrase.
Yeah, no worries. Again, it's a general idea. It's not anything quote worthy at all, but it's just the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you said something about the coaches trying to insert themselves kind of in that process, and this is way down in the weeds. But one of the things that we've seen, is like with riders that have moved up, is that you're helping them to track, right, and you're trying to keep them on this progression, and then you have certain managers that might take that athlete and then take them, in terms of loading, they take them and they ramp them into loads that they can't possibly sustain. And then of course they crack, and, and it doesn't help the athlete at the end of the day. So, and I'm not sure how to overcome the equation where, it's almost like there has to be a dance between the DS and the coach to ensure that the athlete is actually going to be successful. I mean, you wouldn't have brought them on the team if you didn't hope that they were going to be successful. And so you would think that you'd want to have, their entire support network involved in that athlete's progression.
Right. The thing that keeps it being completely involved is, especially like, let's say a team like mine, where we only have 3 staff members and 10 riders, and I got this other stuff, is one, I get tired and I don't have time. 2, like the coach, not that it's irrelevant to me, but like, it's not really important to me what he thinks that what races the rider should be going to, because it's a professional team and we have to go to the races. this is the point of racing. If you want to go to Europe and race 65, 70 times a year, unless you're Brandon McNulty or Quinn Simmons, you don't get to choose your race schedule. And if you're not good enough to go to Joe Martin and then Gila back to back, then you might not be good enough to race professionally. We can't have everything. I understand the coach's desire to have the rider at top shape all the time, but it's not possible. But it's preparing that rider to be good, or to get ready for the suffering and to learn the suffering and learn survival skills. Not to say, don't worry, you're going to have these magic legs and you're just going to float around the pack. Because that's not bike racing. Only one person gets to do that. And quite frankly, like if you're on a Volo, you're probably not that guy anyway. You know, like we have to find the kids that are a little underlooked. So it's one of those things where it's not that it's not important to me to have the coaches on board, but it should be more important for the coaches to prepare their athletes for this and be a little bit more honest with their athletes instead of saying, don't worry, like, how about this? Like, instead of feeding them doubts about their plans, about the race plan, feeding them confidence. And I see a lot of the time coaches feeding doubt and worry, like, oh, that's not the best. That's not the best. And you're like, yeah, this is bike racing. Not everything is the best leaving.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was looking at it from the other part of the equation, right? Is that, you know, as a coach, you know, at least you would hope that the coach is, you know, trying to prepare the athlete for, you know, XYZ event, right? And as a director, you're the one saying what those events are. And then, you know, maybe there's a conversation that is, you know, are you going to be adequately ready for those events? And that gets relayed back to the DS, you know, that, hey, they may not be as ready as you would like, but they'll be as ready as they're going to be for those events. But then you have, you know, I've seen managers go the other direction and sowing doubt into the athletes about the trajectories that the coaches are giving them.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the thing, right? Like the athlete's going to be in the middle a little bit. And it takes maturity on both ends. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a bike racer, you got to learn how to be a bike racer. And if you want to be really good at training, then you can do that too. Obviously, there's a middle ground. But and the reason I'm so passionate about it is because when I was a junior and under 23, I was all about training and I was trying to get everything perfect, and nobody really gave me the heads up that it's not about how good you are all the time. It's a lot of times it's about how good you are when you're bad. And that was a different mindset. I thought, well, if I'm not going to be really good, then I might as well just take it easy, kind of sit at the back and just kind of faff around, you know, where that's when I could have been learning a lot more survival skills and being a better teammate and bluffing more and surprising yourself too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and I really want to thank everybody for coming on. You know, these documents are open. They, you know, like I said, they are working documents. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to piece this together into a slideshow, and then I'll present that on Thursday, and I'll record it and post it out. And it's usually, you know, in the 10 to 15 minute range. And then people can provide additional comments on it, and then I'm going to be packaging everything together, and hopefully be able to keep that to a half an hour if I can. But is there anything else in this space that we didn't really cover that you think is important? You know, regarding, you know, we're really talking about taking these kids from riding with their local clubs and having fun riding bikes through regional racing, local and regional racing in a participatory way, and then taking them into national and international level racing and preparing them for what comes next.
Hey, Sean, the one thing I saw it somewhere, but I don't know where it was. Maybe at some point, maybe it's regionally or nationally, that you run things through a 501c3. I saw it somewhere in the document, but maybe like the academy is a 501c3, and that academy is regional, and so it can get funding from different sources.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, in fact, I'll use Joe as a prime example here. I mean, Joe's, you know, kind of building up this little squad, and he
Oh,
called
there it is.
me up.
Yeah.
He called me up asking about, you know, the 501c3 thing, and I was like, well, you know that, you know, I have the Youth Cycling Association, and we can even discuss using that as a platform for routing money, much like, you know, we use the Fast Ready Foundation, you know, to do some of that for you know, having a Team California women's team here at Redlands, you know, and taking some angel money through you guys, you know, and I think that, you know, we can look at that strategy also, and using the Youth Cycling Association as a, I don't want to say a, you know, a crutch, but it's like a starting place, right? If you're still trying to figure out, is this something that you want to be a long-term project, or is it something that you just want to try on for size, right? Put your toe in the water and see if it's going to work. It seems like that might be a better route to go than, you know, trying to go through all the jazz of trying to jumpstart your own 501c3 and building up that infrastructure, which takes money, right? I mean, all these things take money and time.
Yeah. Well, you know, also with AJ's team, we get donations through corporations that have matching programs. You know, we're part of the Benevity program, and they're a third-party app, right, for the corporations that match. So that's another way to raise money is through corporations, is just having individuals donate through their job, and the corporations will match it.
So in that case, you know, let's just look at that a little bit further. Is that, you know, if we list the Youth Cycling Association as part of Benevity, so that we can actually take advantage of those matching grants, then that would open up doors for even, you know, people that, you know, I want to say they're angel donors, but, you know, they're not giving it maybe at very high level, but we're getting matches for things, and then we can
Yeah.
route that money to specific programs that get earmarked.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
what we've done.
Is that kind of what you're thinking? So something
Yeah,
like
no, I mean, that's what we've done for Team California.
right. But I mean, the Youth Cycling Association is set up to be a national network, so I think it would be very appropriate for us to use it kind of in that way.
Yeah.
Donations. Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle is, you know, how do we get the, you know, sustainable funding to really help programs, you know, kind of in a global context, move forward. I mean, I was talking with Alan Lim last week or maybe the week before, you know, and he put it in a context of, you know, that we have a scarcity of resources. So there's a tendency of everybody to basically take what they can get and tell everybody else to just kind of shove off, you know, as opposed to saying, okay, how do we work together to, you know, improve
Grow
our
the ecosystem.
Yeah, improve the entire ecosystem, which is, you know, what our goal at the Cycling Association is to try to build the entire ecosystem up. Yeah, and he was suggesting a tiding program, much in the way that People for Bikes work, where you actually go after corporate donors to provide, you know, small amounts that are, you know, now derived based on their gross sales. Now, I don't know if we can make that fly, but that is another way. I'll put that in there underneath the alumni donor pool.
Sorry about getting here so late.
Well, it's late there for you. It's after 10 o'clock, Happy.
Yeah, I had a meeting with Colavita.
Ah.
They're coming back.
That's good to know.
With a women's team or a men's team?
Women's team and possibly a few small regional development squads.
They've actually got a really good kids bike program.
Is there anything else that we should get in here? I mean, Happy, I know you always have considerations about the bicycle, and we've just kind of skipped over that stuff. And
Yeah.
In previous stages, we had talked about limiting the bicycle to basically a Merc style bike, as opposed to allowing for funny bikes and things like that. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Billy or Joe brought up the concept that, really when they're getting up to, especially this higher level, that they need to be ready to be able to use that type of equipment when they move across into the higher level ranks as an elite rider.
I have no problem with their elite riders using the equipment. I just have a problem when it ends their performances with poor performances because they don't fit. And I think of Rebecca Twigg going to the Olympics with her super bike and wanting her GT back because the bike fit so poorly, but they were insistent that she use it because they were the sponsors.
Right.
And I personally feel a little more protective of my riders than my sponsors.
So equipment cost is a lot less of a consideration at this high end of the junior programming. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, we've done a lot tonight. I really want to thank everybody for coming on. I think we've kind of hammered into some of the questions that I had. But if there's anything else that you can think of, even after this, you kind of go off and, wait a minute, what about that? Just send me an email and I'll incorporate it if you don't have the direct access to these notes. Jono, you've been very quiet. I know you have a lot of knowledge back there.
I was actually just about to say, Sean, I'm gonna read over all of the notes that you have sent me over the last week or so, but I do have some, obviously just different experiences in Australia as well about how stuff was run there, and obviously there's a lot more money being government funded and that sort of thing. But there is scope for. Earlier you were saying about the NASCAR tracks and utilizing or trying to obtain grants for places to ride for younger people, much like they do in parts of Europe and across Australia. So whether that's something that, Scotty and Ernie Lechuga up in Arkansas have developed a bit of a road track around a property now that they're able to take kids up and do some outdoor riding in the summer and spring. So having that sort of stuff regionally where you can take young athletes to a safe place to ride off-road and on-road is something that I'd like to see more or discuss with you more. Sorry.
Yeah, I've interacted with somebody locally here. Locally to Southern California, who was trying to build a park like that, with velodrome,
Right.
He wants velodromes,
Right.
road and dirt. And, it's a big project, and he has, the question is, can you get the money? Can you get the land? Right. Those two big parts of the equation. And he's got the land, but he doesn't have the money yet. Right. So it's one of those kind of dances. And that's where, if we had corporations that we could get behind, even just from a health and wellness perspective and not even think about competition, that might even be better way to go, and thinking about, I look at Optum specifically because, we're sponsored by, the local medical center, and they just got bought by Optum. I'm like, wait a minute, that's a national company. Maybe we should have a bigger conversation with them, not specifically about our junior development program per se, but about health and wellness for our community, and being able to have somebody like that come in and working with health and wellness to build infrastructure that can be used not just for health and wellness, but also for competition.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Sean. That would be my only input at the moment.
Great. Thanks. Anybody else have anything else at all right now? Otherwise, we'll call it a night. I really want to thank everybody for coming on.
Nothing from me. Thanks a lot, Sean. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All good. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming on. And there will be transcripts of this one. Unfortunately, I forgot to record this afternoon's discussion, so we kind of lost that. But it is what it is. All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay.